Welcome back, little helpers. I'm so excited about this episode because, often we can get into some heavy topics and we love, Kibby and I love talking about dating. And normally it's just us kind of giving our own wisdom, but today we have an actual dating coach. So dating coach Evan Katz is the author of 4 books and has been featured in hundreds of media outlets since 2003. His blog has over 35 million readers. His podcast called Love You has over 2.5 million downloads, and 13,000 women have taken his video course that helps smart, successful women find love. And to prove it all, that he knows how to date successfully, Evan is happily married and lives in Los Angeles. So Evan, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here.
We just get to pick your brain about all things dating, and I'm so excited because normally it's just like Kibby and me analyzing our love lives and our friends' love lives based on what we know from science. But we're 2 women, and you help women, date men. So can you, first of all, tell us what inspired you to become a dating coach and what your work typically looks like? Like who comes in your door?
Yeah, I have to have abject humility about what I do because it was not plan A. I don't think most people end up in plan A with their career, but I moved to Hollywood to be a screenwriter. I was a comedy writer back at Duke and wanted to continue that when Friends came on the air back in 1994. And after about a decade of pursuing it wholeheartedly, I realized I had no money. And so I needed to pivot. And went to film school. And while I was in film school at UCLA, I took a job answering phones at an online dating company. Just getting yelled at by strangers, low-level customer service, not a glamorous job. But I discovered that I was using the same site that I was advising people on, and they would call to complain about their password or their photo or their recurring billing. But I would help them with their profile and how to flirt. And I was just offering more than anybody was asking for in customer service. And after about a year of that, I realized, oh my God, I should write a book about this. And unlike my Hollywood career, my literary career went well. And my first book was called I Can't Believe I'm Buying This Book, A Common Sense Guide to Successful Internet Dating. And that got me in Time Magazine and USA Today and CNN. And I never looked back. And that was 20 years ago. And so over the years, I refined what I did from specializing in online dating, expanding my suite of services to meet the needs of the people who turn to me. And it turns out 80% of the people who turned to me were women. It was, I didn't ask for it, but after 5 years of just being a generic dating coach before there was such a thing, I focused my energies on the people who were most likely to seek out my help. And it happened to be a certain type of woman. Smart, strong, successful, high-achieving women, often women in big liberal cities who had everything except for the guy. And so 2010, I started Love You, which is my signature course, helping women make better dating and relationship choices, starting from confidence and ending in commitment.
Awesome. What a testament to the things that we always say, which is, just go with it. Just go where life takes you, because what a cool story of like, just a job that turned into this whole beautiful career. So that's pretty awesome.
I'm the luckiest guy in the world for having failed as miserably as I did.
Okay, so what does is it mostly women who come in and they're just like, I can't get a man, I don't know what's going on, or do you do work with like established couples?
I don't do any couples counseling.
Okay.
It's not that I don't believe in couples counseling, but number one, I'm not qualified to be a couples counselor. And number two, my strong belief is if indeed you marry well, you don't necessarily need couples counseling. I have a different orientation than a lot of people who do this work, in that my working theory is that good relationships are fundamentally easy. And most people think of relationships as work. Bad relationships take a lot of work. So I try to help people get into relationships that are fundamentally easy, where you can feel relaxed without anxiety, let down your guard, trust, be yourself. And if you have a relationship like that, it requires effort. You have to water the garden, but it shouldn't be such a struggle to make things work. And so I try to just help people find better relationships that don't require couples counseling.
Yeah, in my last, So I was, and I think you've described yourself as a former serial dater. I was definitely a serial dater. And commitment was hard. And then I kind of committed to this guy. And having heard all of this messaging of relationships take a lot of work, it's the hardest thing you'll ever do. I really buckled down in a very difficult relationship. And it was hard to tell, like, what is this just, what part of this is just part of being in a relationship and this is the work? And how do I know when this is too much work? Do you have kind of insight on how women can answer that question?
Yeah, I mean, I think, let's say, I'll cite an example. I don't even know if this exists anymore, but years ago, a friend of mine made an app called the Boyfriend Log. I don't think she's kept up with updating it, but it was so simple, and that's why I loved it. It was like a little color-coded calendar. So every day you check in emotionally about your relationship with your guy. And red is it's bad, and yellow is it's okay, and green is it's good. And if you look at a given calendar month and it's mostly red, your relationship isn't that good. And you have to ask yourself, why am I preserving something that's making me unhappy? And
Mm-hmm.
that parallels other things. There was the point in my career that I cited earlier where I was like, I put all my heart and soul into writing, and it was fundamentally making me unhappy. I had to take stock of that, right? Because if your dream is making you unhappy, maybe you need to pivot your dream. If you're anchored on the idea that this relationship is the be all end all, but most of the time you are anxious and biting your tongue and wondering if you should stay or you should go, and you don't know how to talk to him, and you're always wondering if your head's on the chopping block. Oh my God, that's exhausting.
Yeah, we've all been there. Yeah. Well, all the things you're saying, I'm like, oh God, I've been there so many times. So speaking to of our former selves and other women who find it so hard to date, I'm sure that feeling comes up a lot, right? I think the scariest thing is when you're dating, and I'm like, I feel that way about a lot of different relationships I've had. This, oh, am I in the right one? Is it me? Is it him? What do you see, going back to the question of who comes through your door, what are people doing? What are women doing wrong? Like, why do we find the wrong things, the wrong relationships?
Well, without going backwards, right? Here's an interesting distinction. I don't know if this is a universal distinction, but between what psychologists do and what coaches do. Psychologists are about looking backwards.
Mhm.
Who messed you up? How did your parents hurt you? What beliefs did they give you about how the world works? Coaching is about the blank canvas moving forward. Okay, we're all a little messed up. What are we going to do now that is empowering, that lets go of the script of the past that hasn't served you well?
Mhm.
Right? So where we started today, I think, is actually really instructive. We collectively have normalized anxiety and work as defining features of relationships.
Interesting.
Oh my God, butterflies. I don't know if he's going to call. I'm so nervous. I hope I don't do something stupid. Right?
Mm.
He's a high value man. And if I don't do everything just right, I might lose him to some other woman who's younger and thinner and prettier or smarter. And how
Mhm.
could you ever relax? So my defining feature of a successful relationship is a relationship without anxiety.
Mm.
That is the defining characteristic. And that's a
Interesting.
different orientation than I've heard expressed before.
Yeah, I saw it on your one sheet. You had a a question that was like, what is the dark side, basically, or the downside of dating wealthy, attractive, smart men? And that was definitely my goal for all of my 20s, was to find that guy. And I found a lot of them,
Mm-hmm.
but either I didn't like them or they didn't commit. And and I'm actually very pleased with my current guy, who I think has all those elements, but isn't like a billionaire. What is the downside, and how do you help women figure out maybe a different goal?
So there's always logic and emotion, right? We're emotional creatures, but I come from more of a place of logic, which has to sort of cut through that. Emotionally, I just spoke with a woman yesterday who was married for 40 years to a guy who she knew 3 months in didn't make her happy.
Mm.
And she stayed with him out of fear and inertia. the idea that she couldn't do better, the idea that she was afraid to be on her own, the idea that because she made a commitment, she can never go back on the commitment, all these stories that we tell ourselves. And so that to me is the worst fate of all, to have your whole life go by feeling small, unseen, unhappy. And we need to intervene at the front, because if you make a bad choice at the beginning, it's a lot harder to get out of it later.
Mm-hmm.
And so I forgot the question. I was going to finish up with a solid point, but what was the original question?
What's wrong with trying to find men who are wealthy, attractive, smart?
So it's not what's wrong with it, because people will hear that and say, oh, this guy is telling me that I have to settle, right? Like I could say whatever you want, and all someone's going to hear is he's telling me to settle.
Yeah.
And to me, settling is being in a relationship with a rich man who works 50 weeks a year out of town. Right? Settling is being with a guy who's so tyrannical that he doesn't care about your opinions, doesn't pick up on your emotional cues, doesn't want to spend quality time, doesn't want to talk to you about what's bothering you, right? Has a woman on the side. Those are all forms of settling, and people make peace with it if he's cute enough, tall enough, smart enough, rich enough, whatever. And so I would posit that most people have settled and continue to settle on relationships. They just don't call it settling if he looks good to other people. And so listen to your emotions. They don't lie. If you are completely unsettled in your relationship, you are settling. So then we have to understand that good qualities come with bad qualities. There aren't many multimillionaires who get home at 5, right? And want to help out with housework and child rearing, right?
Yeah.
There's like good qualities come with bad qualities. Hey, you want a multimillionaire? I don't blame you. I want a multimillionaire too, right? But he's going to be married to his work first. You want a guy who's gorgeous? Well, he knows he's gorgeous. Other women tell him he's gorgeous. They're throwing themselves at him. Maybe he's become a little bit of a narcissist because of it. Maybe he is less likely to settle down and wants an open relationship because he's been able to get away with it for all these years. Maybe he demands more physical beauty and perfection from you because he is so gorgeous, right? Want a guy who's really brilliant? You guys, you're a Duke. You've met some really brilliant people. A lot of them are kind of stuck in their heads, socially awkward, stubborn, arrogant, condescending, dismissive, right? Is it a coincidence that there's no such thing as a happy Mrs. Jobs or Mrs. Musk? Is that a coincidence? No. So sometimes there's too much of a good thing. And ultimately, we're all looking for some measure of balance. So can you date a guy who makes less money than you? Yes. Right? Can you date a guy who's not as intelligent as you? Yes. You can't be with a guy that you look down upon, that you don't respect. But if you're in the 95th percentile and he's in the 90th percentile, I'd say you're doing okay.
Even just hearing this, I'm having this anxiety that I felt when I thought I had to go out on the dating sphere. Like, luckily I got to skirt a lot of that, but just the idea and watching my friends go through the apps and date after date, the anxiety comes from like, okay, now what do I do with that? Like, it's so hard to find someone, but why is it so hard to find what you're talking about? Like, what are the first steps of someone who's like, oh my gosh, I have to date now, but how do I find someone has good qualities, but the right balance and wants to commit and,
Yeah, I mean, again, this is the crux of my Love You program, and we really try to provide the equivalent of like cheat sheets for people to follow because it's so hard to trust your own judgment when your judgment has historically been wrong. So we tend to overvalue chemistry. We tend to overvalue people who are like you, whether it means master's educated or my ethnicity or my religion or my politics. We tend to overvalue similarity because we're attracted to what's familiar, right? But there's no evidence that has a good track record in relationships, right? All that matters is how someone treats you. So there's a wonderful, you guys are academics, I'm not an academic. There was a wonderful study that came out of Northwestern 1 or 2 summers ago that talked about what you're attracted to has zero correlation to whether you're happily married. Which is not to say that attraction or sex doesn't matter, but rather the things that bring you into a relationship. I'm 5'7", he's 6 feet, right? You know, I make 100,000, he makes 200,000. Those things do not portend a happy marriage. Right? What portends a happy marriage? one of the things I mentioned earlier, does he help out with housework and child rearing?
Mhm.
Is he sensitive to my emotional cues? Right? That's a better predictor of your marriage. And does anybody go on Bumble looking for a man who's sensitive to their emotional cues?
Well, you're talking about the different categories on those on those
My point is you
sites.
can't. The medium itself is so very shallow. So then it's like, okay, so now I know this. What do I do with this information?
Mhm.
So we start off with, okay, if you're working 45 hours a week, how much time are you putting into the act of finding love? Because my central metaphor in my course is that you're the CEO of your love life and men are the interns applying for a job. And so we need to
Nice.
take in a lot of intern applications to find a good one. We might have to go through a lot of them, and we might need to leave that job opening available because he's getting the corner office in tenure. This is an important job. There's one of them. So we need to leave that open until we find a really good candidate, not just fill it because we're lonely or because he's cute and he's the first guy who's shown interest in a long time. Wrong reason to fill that job. So coming from a place of abundance to recognize your value and how it's not just, does he look good on paper, but are we looking for the same things going forward? That might take 5 or 6 weeks to establish, of starting off with texting and escalating to phone calls and FaceTime and escalating to first dates and physically going around the bases before you have sex. We really want to stretch the dating process out for close to 5 to 6 weeks before deciding if he's a boyfriend, before sleeping with him, to avoid making colossal mistakes by hooking up with a guy on the third date and then keeping your fingers crossed that he commits to you, which is, to me, getting the order wrong. And that's without any morality around sex. I'm not judging anybody who does it. I've done it. It just doesn't have a good track record. So we're all just working backwards from what works. And if you could avoid sleeping with randos who don't want to take down their profile, getting attached to them, then coming from a place of need, I hope he picks me. Now you're the intern, not the CEO. These are all the things that we routinely do wrong that put us in this position of feeling like we're on a roller coaster and we can't get off.
So this sex thing, so one of two kind of hypotheses jump immediately to mind for why it's not good to have sex early on. One is the woman-centered hypothesis, which is that, there's a belief, which I think has some scientific evidence, that women tend to attach more readily and intensely after they have sex. But the other hypothesis would be like a man-centered hypothesis, that they lose interest if they get sex too easily. And that second hypothesis always seemed true, but was also a little bit frustrating because if I had sex early on with somebody, I don't tend to attach. And I'd be like, but you still don't have me. Like like we had, a physical experience, but I'm still not committed. I'm not sold. You don't have my heart or my mind or anything. And so that I guess is it more woman-centered? Is it more man-centered? Is it both? And then if there is something about men, why is there the belief that, okay, I can discard now that I've had sex?
You said a lot of really interesting things, and I'm going to do my best to sort of tease them out.
Yeah, sorry, that was a lot.
And build on what you said, not because I'm, the be all end all when it comes to this subject, but it is something that comes up a lot as a male dating coach for women. So my wife said something that I always thought was again, we could always deal with crude gender stereotypes, and there's a basis in truth. We can't ignore that. It's just not true across the board. You guys are academics. You know how the bell curves work, where we could say men are taller, but Janine is 5'11 and Jim is 5'7. So what does that mean? So in general, we could say men are less likely to get attached from sex. And so my wife said men look for sex, and in the process of looking for sex, they find love. No guy has ever gone up to a woman at a bar because he thought she'd be a good mom, even though that's really important. Right? So men look for sex, put that first, and we see it in their behavior. Put the sex part first, and then they'll figure the rest out later. But sex in and of itself doesn't mean he likes you, doesn't mean he's attracted to you, doesn't mean he's emotionally available. It literally means nothing other than the physical act. And so some women would say, well, I would never do that. You might. But a lot of women would be, I would never sleep with some rando just because he was there and I had 4 drinks. But guys will do that all the time. Right? And women are surprised. Wait, why would he sleep with me if he didn't like me? Like,
Mhm.
why would he sleep with me if he didn't have room for me in his life? What? I wouldn't do that. So women are often perpetually baffled at the fact that men have different incentives than they do. If you're a woman who can detach from it, then you could have no strings attached sex and date stereotypically like a guy, and that's fine too. Then there's the other thing that you brought up, which was people, not just men, tend to devalue what comes too easily to them.
Mhm.
And I don't know exactly what the psychological phenomenon would be called, right? But we want to climb up the tree and pluck the apple off the top. We don't want to take the apple that's sitting on the ground,
Mhm.
right? So, right, that's why guys talk about body count and stupid things like that. I think it's silly. I think it's hypocritical, right? And yet it's kind of real if everybody buys into the fact that it's real, right? If everybody says, well, why would I sleep with her if she hooks up with every guy on the second date? I can't be particularly special,
Mhm.
right? And everybody wants to feel special. And that's not unusual. And by the way, women have their own versions of this. You ever go out with a guy who told you exactly what you would dream of hearing on a first date? You're so beautiful. You're so smart. Oh my God, I can't believe I feel like you're the one. And you're like, oh my God, creeper, like this is way too much too soon. Nobody
Mhm.
likes when it comes too easily.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I think that the distinguishing factor seems to be if what men are primarily looking for when they go out is sex, and then sex is what they get easily, then they're not going to find love on the route to it
They're
because they've already
not
gotten it.
necessarily incentive. I'll use myself for an example, right? I was prolific online dater, 300 dates. I had a count before I wrote a book about it. Um, uh, and my goal wasn't to be a player. That wasn't the end game. I always wanted to get married. I always wanted to be a dad. That was always the plan. I wasn't going to remain celibate until I found my soulmate.
Mhm.
So I kept busy. I tried not to hurt people. I tried to find some ethical way of doing it. I didn't do, you know, long booty calls. I didn't let people fall in love with me. Maybe that was my foolish, arrogant male assumption that people would have feelings for me. But I didn't. I tried to minimize that. And then I reached a point where I was like, I'm not sleeping with anybody. That's where I arrived at in my early 30s, right before I met my wife, was I'm not sleeping with anybody until I think I want her to be my girlfriend. And so I went on like about in the last 2 years before I got married, I basically learned it was more powerful to say no to sex because saying yes created far more complications when either you or I discovered after a few weeks of sex, oh, I don't really like this person.
Mhm.
So I really just have come to this slow dating methodology. And it's not glacial. No one's talking about saving yourself for marriage. You could still have a lot of fun and a lot of foreplay. Just maybe get to know someone before you sleep with them instead of sleeping with them and then getting to know them
Mhm.
afterwards.
Mhm. Makes sense. Talk to us a little more about, you mentioned chemistry earlier, and like what is it? How do we know we have it? What can we trust and what we can't? Can it grow over time? Just because if you're just out dating, like looking for that intern, right? And from what I hear from people who date a lot, finding genuine chemistry, it's actually quite hard. And so when you do like feel that click, it's like, oh yeah, let's go for this. Let's like really nurture it. Or on the opposite end, you like are dating someone who is nice and great, but there isn't that chemistry. And
So
then they go, does this grow over time? Should I stick with it? Like what, when you're dealing with dating and finding like the best person for you, how do you evaluate chemistry?
sure, it's a really good question. Well, chemistry, the reason the term exists is because it's talking about brain chemicals. You can go to Wikipedia and go down to the biological basis of love on Wikipedia, and they'll talk about chemistry starts as lust, moves to attraction, and moves to what the last term is. I think commitment, but there's another term for it. But it starts with lust. Dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, pheromones, it's brain chemistry, which means it's largely akin to being high. It's the same pleasure centers as coke and methamphetamine. So you have high highs and low lows. And anybody who's ever been intoxicated with someone, the New York Times just did a piece on limerence a couple of days ago, right? The idea of being so filled up with excitement about someone that you can't think clearly, where it borders on obsession. There's nothing healthy about that. And so, but we think that that's what we need to feel because we felt it before. How could I go with the rest of my life without that? Well, it's never had a happy ending. That's how, right? Just like there's no happy ending about the Coke addict. There's no happy ending when you're on cloud nine, your chemistry is a 10 plus plus because you're not the best version of you when you're with that person, right? And you're not really being yourself. There's someone named Alison Armstrong who does really great dating relationship advice as well. And she says, when you find a 10 chemistry, run in the opposite direction. And the reason the dorky guy has a crush on you at work is because you act like yourself around him. With the 10 plus plus chemistry guy, you don't act like yourself. You act needy, weird, giggly, talk too much, talk too little, right? You're the best version of yourself with your best girlfriend or your mom or something like that. So that's where that's the relationship zone. That's where all the happiness lies. So I would focus less on physical chemistry, which again is not to say it doesn't matter. There needs to be a baseline of it, and I'll get to that in a half a second. I would focus on connection. That was the thing that I had with my wife. Met her at a potluck dinner, talked to her for 7 hours until the party closed. Right? It wasn't rush of physical. I didn't approach her like on a beeline. It was more just this easy conversation that you didn't want, like the metaphorical, you close down the restaurant. That's the connection that I would hope everybody has with their partner. We're going to close down this restaurant tonight, not we're going to rip each other's clothes off in 45 minutes. Right. So you want to start dating. Let's normalize this. Let's give people some structure. You need to have a baseline of chemistry that is enough that it could be ignited and grow, but you can't take nothing and turn it into something. You can't take the nicest guy in the world and will yourself to like him in that way. And forcing yourself to do so is recipe for disaster. It's unfair to you. It's unfair to him as well. So if we're making up numbers, and numbers are crude, but they serve a purpose, on a 1 to 10 scale, you got to start with a 6, right? Okay. Positive score. Like, okay, if he kissed me, I'd kiss him back. Not, oh my God, I'm obsessed with him, but sure. Most of the couples that I've helped, and then this is thousands over the years, facilitate, right? Started with a 6 that turned into a 9, right? But nobody started with a 3 that turned into a 9. But the thinking that you have to start with a 9 is what's wrong. Lori Gottlieb, I don't know if you know what Lori Gottlieb is. Feel like you guys should. She wrote Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, really wonderful book on psychology. Her previous book was Marry Him, which was about dating and relationships, about being she was Yale, she was Stanford, she sold her childhood diaries, she contributed to NPR. She's a huge brain, and she's an old friend of mine. I've known her for 25 years, right? And I coached her throughout the writing of that book, right? I was her dating coach, right? Every other chapter was about me coaching her, right? And she's sort of exhibit A when you hold out for something that doesn't even exist, which is this mythical 10 chemistry, 10 compatibility guy. And if you look at all your friends who are in happy relationships and ask them, do you have a 10? I mean, no one does this. Do you have a 10 in chemistry and a 10 in compatibility? No one's going to tell you yes, unless they're lying to you.
Yeah.
Everybody has to make a trade-off. And I would rather trade off on chemistry a little bit to have compatibility that's going to last me for 40 years. When anybody says, but I don't want to, okay, show me the couple that is still that attracted to each other, because all studies show that attraction, that excitement wears off in 18 to 36 months anyway. And that there's no couple that is as excited about each other, because that's habituation. That's my new car just becomes my car. Nobody is, my wife isn't excited to hear what I have to say every morning. She's been listening to this shit for 15 years. Right? So we have to get past the initial excitement and understand we're making different decisions if we're trying to make decisions for a lifetime than we might make if our goal is simply to swap out hot new boyfriends every 2 years. It's different choices, different decision-making architecture. I'll stop talking now because I know that was a lot.
I'm feeling very smug about my recent life choices because I definitely went from that, like, I need 10 plus, I need the wealthy like guy to I think I've absolutely super compatible and that does it feels easy and much better. So I'm just patting myself on the shoulder given this. But I was talking to a friend earlier who is like, corporate lawyer, very pretty, well educated, super fun, adventurous. And um whenever a guy comes in that's like really, really interested, there's this pull away. So do you ever work with women who maybe because they're looking for that unicorn, or maybe they're looking for the unicorn because they're kind of avoidant of
Mm.
love? How do you get them to start, I guess, trusting that they are lovable, trusting that they've found the right guy, etc.
Sure. Um, I'll always defer to people who are trained in psychology to do the things
Mm,
that I can't do. All I could do is see pattern recognition, what works, what doesn't. So I never frame things in terms of right and wrong. I
mhm,
term them in terms of effective and ineffective. Is this working to help me achieve my goal? So if you always fall for bad boys, right? No one reforms those guys. Another story where there's no happy ending. You could say, well, that's my type. I can't help it. I can't help what I'm attracted to. Well, that probably goes way back to your childhood. And a lot of this
mhm,
stuff goes way back to your childhood. If your father was verbally abusive to your mom and your mom held on and bit her upper lip and survived, well, that's going to inform what relationships look like to you. If your dad abandoned you, you're probably going to find guys who are less available and try to win them over and make peace with that because men, they always leave, right?
mhm,
So we tend to repeat those things subconsciously, where at a certain point, as we said earlier, we're undervaluing kindness and consistency, and we're overvaluing exciting, aloof, unavailable. So we just have to present that in terms of behavior. If you always value men who are unavailable, how do you think the story ends? What's the most valuable quality in a partner is his predictability.
mhm,
Is he going to wake up next to me tomorrow? Right? Exciting is not on that scale. It has to be predictable. So now we've got flip sides of the same coin. Exciting and unpredictable. Well, who doesn't like exciting and unpredictable? No one wants a boring life. But in order to sustain a relationship, right? Just like going to a job, you wouldn't want to go to a job where every day you don't know if your job's going to be there. How
mhm,
chaotic on your emotions. So by overvaluing emotionally unavailable men and consistently choosing them, whether consciously or unconsciously, you're just perpetuating the problem. So we kind of have to rewire women to experience the rewards of consistency. Why? It feels boring, but it's the only thing that sustains. The same way I use a stupid metaphor, I got lots of stupid metaphors. I compare dating to food, right? So if the yummiest food is steak and ice cream, and you say, I love steak and ice cream, I want to eat steak and ice cream three meals a day. Your doctor's going to tell you when you're 45, your heart's going to explode. And I know you love steak and ice cream, Jacqueline, but if you keep up the steak and ice cream diet, you're not going to live long.
yeah.
So wait, are you telling me, doctor, that I have to just have rice cakes and kale? I don't want to have rice cakes and kale. He's like, no, I didn't say that. Just the steak and the ice cream. We probably need to tinker with that. So is there anything between rice cakes and kale and steak and ice cream? Why, yes, it's everything else in the food pyramid. It's chicken and vegetables, and it's really yummy, and you could live forever. And I'm basically telling women, get off the steak and ice cream, choose some chicken and vegetables. It's where all the couples who live 50 years reside.
How do you find a chicken and vegetables kind of guy? Like, let's say you're dating, you've been dating the steak and ice creams all this time, and you only know how to detect those, and
You've
now to be
chosen
scared of
them.
them.
You've
But
chosen them.
how in those early stages of dating, the emotion, like telling if someone's going to be there for you when you're sick, telling if someone's going to be there for your emotions, like how in those early stages of dating, that's actually kind of hard to detect, right? Or you see the flashy stuff first.
Well, now we're bringing up what's basically something that's fear-based. How can I figure out from a guy's dating profile whether he's going to be a good husband? Answer, you can't.
Mhm.
How can I figure out from the first date? Answer, you can't. This is why we date before we get married. We're gathering data, right? If your relationship, like mine did, got stronger over 2 years, well, this is a good indication that you could probably live with each other forever. If your relationship peaked in the first 3 months and pretty much was downhill from there, you have to let it go. So you can't test character, kindness, consistency, communication with a questionnaire on the second date to avoid getting hurt. What you can do is pay attention to how you feel. And if you feel this relationship is trending in the wrong direction, cut the intern loose instead of doubling down on a relationship because it was so good in the beginning.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
I hear that. So wait, a lot of the focus naturally has been on, what kind of men women should be choosing, what they can do. Are there things that women need to understand about men in order to date effectively, in order to get the second or the third or the fourth date?
Oh, gosh, I love that question so very much. Yeah, usually women come to me and they're superstars. I mean, like that, my clients are superstars, and it's a joy. These are the women that I used to date who were not compatible with me, by the way. Right. That's another thing. Everything I'm sharing with you is lessons that I learned the hard way. I'm not just mansplaining love. Like, I had to make different choices with women after 300 dates in order to choose my wife. Right. So this is not me on some sort of perch. But most women I coach were women that I kind of date, the kind of women I dated in the past, ambitious, educated, opinionated. I love that. Right. But it's kind of type A. And often two type A's, there's a lot of friction. And so one of the things that my type A women are trying to figure out is, as you already hinted at, in the first 90 minutes, what's this guy's deal? I'm trying to figure him out like he's a puzzle. Where is this relationship going? Do you have money? Are you looking for a future? Do you want to have kids? Who did you vote for in the last election? Did you not get a vaccine? So we're trying to figure all this stuff out in the first 90 minutes of meeting someone. What a horrible date. Right? And it's all fear-based. I need to figure out what this guy's deal is because I don't want to waste time and I don't want to get attached and I don't want to get hurt. But that's not how dating works. Right? It's just not. It's inorganic. It's ineffective. Nobody likes it. Because you have had a guy who's interviewed you and you hated that too. Right. So we're going back to effective and ineffective. What works? So if I'm a man and I want to do well with women, understand women want to feel safe, heard, and understood. I got to do everything in my power to make women feel safe, heard, and understood. How do you feel safe, heard, and understood? Well, I call you a week in advance and tell you I got a plan for our date. I don't say, what do you want to do? I come up with a plan, right? I tell you the restaurant to meet me at. I check in during the week. I don't just disappear for a week, right? So we're building up trust, anticipation, excitement, rapport, right? Meet you at the restaurant, polite to the waiter and maitre d', order a glass of wine, goes with the meal, pick up the check, end of the night, after listening to you, not hijacking the conversation, telling you how much I hate dating and what's wrong with women and how messed up my family is, and right, really listening to you, hearing your stories, not hijacking the conversation like a lot of guys do. Maybe it's only 10 o'clock. I know of another bar we could walk to from here. Right? Continue the conversation, shut down the place, pick up the check, walk you to your car, drive you home, kiss you goodnight. I had a great time. When could I see you again? Right? Follow up the next day. If I do that, I'm going to get a date 90% of the time because nobody does that, because guys are clueless, right? But by listening to women for all the time I've listened to women, I was told that's what makes a good date. That's what I want. So it's a formula. How could you make a woman feel safe, heard, and understood? Be sensitive, be attentive, right? Don't be a jerk. Be a good listener, be generous emotionally, financially. These are all indicators I've got you. I'm taking care of you.
Hmm.
I don't know one woman who's ever thought about how she could be a good date. You could tell me 100 things that guys do wrong on dates, but I don't know one woman who's ever thought, how could I be an amazing date apart from how I look?
Hmm.
Yeah,
And
I
so
think
that's why I love your question so much, because most women's energy is what's wrong with this guy, not how I can do what I want the guy to do. How could I show up for him the way I want him to show up for me? And so then you understand men's emotions, and men have emotions too, believe it or not. Men want to be accepted and appreciated and admired.
And sex, apparently. Sex.
Right. And so how could you be a good date? You put aside your agenda. I need to figure out what's wrong with him in the first 90 minutes. Put that aside, right? If he indicates to you that he's perverted by sending you dick pics, okay, we have some evidence we shouldn't go out with him again. If he is smothering you and acting like texting you 72 times a day, and you're like, whoa, buddy, stalker, okay, we have it. But you can't try to pull this out of him on the first date. Your job on the first date is make sure you get a second date. How do you get a second date? Making him feel accepted, appreciated, and admired. Because A, as you pointed out, men are looking to get laid. So your job is not to sleep with them on the first date. Your job is to flirt with them and let them know you're doing a good job. You're cute. If you keep up the good work, you got a chance. So just letting him know you're doing a good job. Most women don't do that. They kind of sit there metaphorically with their arms folded, be like, all right, man, show me what you got. Right? Instead of really encouraging that guy. And then there's really nice guys, nervous guys who just want to know that they're impressing you enough to get a second date. And your job is to let them know, yes, you're impressing me enough to get a second date. I love this restaurant. That was an amazing story about you and your grandfather, right? Thank you so much for planning this evening. And when he kisses you goodnight, kiss him back like you mean it. And now guess what? You're going to get a second date 90% of the time just by doing that, by making him feel important, because he doesn't feel important.
That's such a great perspective, because when you said women are, or we are the CEOs of our love life, I think women who've especially been burned for a while are like, okay, if I'm going to take control over this and be the CEO, I'm going to do what you said, like cross my arms and lean back and let the interns apply and, Hunger Games, who's going to win it, and then pick apart all their flaws if you don't like them. But that's a nice balance of, okay, be in the choosing position, but also do what it takes to let that person feel secure enough to be themselves so you can actually evaluate who they are.
Right? What kind of company do you want to work for? Right. So I call it being the benevolent CEO. Hey, we're Google. We're going to give you massages in your chairs. We're going to feed you. Right. We're going to bus you back and forth to your house. How are we going to make your working environment a place that's so great that you're going to want to stay? And so if men are thinking about women's needs and women are thinking about men's needs, now we could have better connections, right? Which is not magic, but that's the kind of thing that also sustains relationships. The intent to think of other people's needs other than your own.
Yeah, I think I loved dating. I thought it was a blast, but then would get hurt, when it didn't work out. And so it was a double-edged sword. But I was very, very good at getting second dates, but it was the like fourth and fifth dates. And I think one of the mistakes that I made beyond choosing very ornamental men was being an ornament myself. I was like, okay, it's so hard to get a guy to love me. And I learned things early on, like I should never be angry. Angry scares them away. Like it was just like so many things that I felt like I had to get just right, that I basically set out to be the most interesting, dazzling date possible. And I think that either intimidated men or made them feel like I wasn't actually very serious, or maybe the focus wasn't on them enough. And this is something we hear about highly successful women, is that men consider them intimidating. So if you could kind of comment on whether that's a myth or if it's actually some other element of how women are coming across that is intimidating, and then what men are actually maybe looking for. I know you said to be admired and accepted, but also if men are like going out looking for chemistry and sex all the time, then I think that's where I got the impression, like I need to be dazzling. So how do you work with those elements, I guess?
Okay. Really interesting question. One I get a lot. Any man who's intimidated by you is not man enough for you. So let's just start there,
Mm-hmm.
right? Are there men who are intimidated by smart, strong, successful women? Absolutely. They've eliminated themselves from contention. We don't need to worry about them. So essentially, they don't count.
Mm-hmm.
They exist, but they don't count. And I would tell any woman who's listening who feels like she's a high achieving woman who has a trouble finding a quality guy, let's validate that experience. Okay, 90% of guys are not qualified. Boom. You're an Ivy League school, 90% rejection rate. Perfect. Okay. That means there's 10% of guys.
Mm-hmm.
All you need is one. So oh my God, there's no guys. No, you need one. And we're choosing from a pool of 10%, just like an Ivy League school would choose from a pool of about 10% of people. Yeah. So let's just start there. Men are abundant. There's good ones mixed in with the bad ones. And most of them are not going to be your guy. And we shouldn't lose too much sleep about it. That is predictable. So a guy who's intimidated by you is not in that 10%. Next. Then the question is, why would a guy who's not intimidated by you not want to go out with you? Right. And that is worthy of exploration. And usually it comes from the fact that smart, strong, successful women, like smart, strong, successful men, are very much caught up in self.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's the popular terminology. I didn't name it, so please don't blame me for it. Is masculine and feminine energy. Right. Masculine is about me, my ideas, my ambition, my ego, me. My platform, my brand, my travels, my workout routine, me. And feminine energy is about supporting others. It's Mother Teresa, right? Oh, no. It's not about me at all. It's all about you. How could I make you happy? How could I make you comfortable? Now, all human beings need to have both to be functional. You got your toxic masculine Trump, where it's always about him and it's never about anybody else, right? And then you've got your Mother Teresa's who, do they get any pleasure in their life when it's never about them? Right. So we're really looking for a blend and a combination of those two things. And what a lot of masculine energy men, the guys who are the masters of the universe, are looking for is not a female version of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Right. He's going to be fine dating a nurturing first grade teacher. Right. Rupert Murdoch is not looking for another billionaire. He's looking for a blonde 30 years younger. Right. If you're a billionaire, you're looking for another billionaire. But the truth is, a relationship doesn't need two billionaires. It needs balance. Right. So to me, that's the first place to start, is understanding that men and women are different, and that's okay. And you don't have to adhere to a stereotype, but we're really just talking about putting different puzzle pieces together and seeing how they fit. What I discovered as a guy who's kind of type A, who was attracted to type A women, it just ended up being too much friction. And I needed someone who was just a little more easygoing and a little bit more supportive, right? So it wasn't just an ego fest.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it took me a long time to stumble into, oh, that's a better formula than I need to date the female version of me, which is the most common thing that I see with my clients. You want to date you, but taller, smarter, richer, cuter, and without your flaws.
Accurate.
I love that focus on balance. I think that's a really nice way to frame and looking for it, not you're just selecting the best and the top cream of the crop is something that's a good balance for you and to make the best unit together.
I think that's wise, but it's hard because everybody will play this game, and it's even more pervasive now that dating apps are ubiquitous. Right? We'll always play this game, but I've done better.
Mm-hmm.
I've dated the guy with the private jet. I've dated the guy who's 6'4". I've dated the guy who was amazing in bed. Why would I ever not do that? And it's because none of them ever worked. Mm-hmm. That guy was deficient in something else that destroyed your relationship. And so all of those great qualities don't redeem an unhappy relationship. So my wife's boyfriend before me was 10 years younger than her and 6'7". I can't compete with that. Right? But I didn't have to. I was a better guy. I was a better partner.
Mm-hmm.
I treated her better. Right?
Makes sense.
Yeah, I think I think a lot of women might say, okay, because I've dated those guys, the problem, what if it was me? And if I just make myself more
Mm.
interesting, beautiful, better in some way?
Right. But how tiring is that? How could
Uh,
I make myself? Here's the thing. I'll share a story briefly. It's a friend of mine who's in the 1% of 1%. He's the cutest guy I know. He's the richest guy I know. He's the most experienced with women. Like, we go out, I'm invisible. There's only one guy there. It's my best friend. This guy
that
was
sucks.
this guy was married to a real housewife. It's LA. He was married to a
Oh.
real housewife. She was a cheating alcoholic. They had a kid. They went their separate ways. His next wife was a cheating alcoholic. Right. I
Mm.
nudged him get divorced when he was 55, and he's crying to me in his car and saying, "What's wrong with me?
Mm.
How did I end up here?" I said, "You made two big mistakes and you doubled down on them for your entire adult life." That guy, who I'm really, really close to, is not the ideal husband, even though objectively on paper, he has it all over me. Right? He comes from a really damaged past. He has avoidant tendencies. He has anger tendencies. Right? He likes to be in control of everything. So with those guys, you get some glow to be with the guy who's the best catch. But are you going to be happy when you come home at the end of the party? Maybe not. In fact, probably not.
Mhm.
And I just don't know too many couples in the 1% of 1%, the power couples that are actually enviable couples. Do you think that Beyonce and Jay-Z are a good couple? Really? Come on.
You bring up a really good topic that we love to talk about, the influence of loved ones, right? You're talking about you nudged your friend and you're watching the poor guys dating train wrecks. Sorry to your best friend,
No,
but
it's all right.
I'm sure that your clients or, we get dating advice from everyone, from our friends, family. They have expectations. They say the best of us, they say the worst of us. What can they do to support this process? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people who want to tell them the truth of like, okay, dude, you're doing this wrong. Or do they just support and say, hey, you're great, keep going? Like what can loved ones do to actually help?
I think it's a really good question. I don't have a ready-made answer for it, so forgive me. The thing with dating advice is everybody does it, and they've been doing it since like eighth grade.
Mhm.
So we come really reflexively. And how are we giving advice? We're just doing it through our lens, through our experience, through our opinion. That's not best practices. That's like everybody giving medical advice. Like it really diminishes people who have spent more time in that space. But technically, anybody could do it, right? Especially with dating, because it's a softer science than medicine. And so I would largely take advice from people who either have a really great track record of I was using an example, Lori Gottlieb really early. She really knows what the hell she's talking about. She hasn't lived it at all, but she can help other people even if she can't follow her own advice. So someone could be really skilled, right? You could have a fat person giving diet advice, and it's good diet advice, even if they don't take the diet. So someone who's really, really skilled at that, or someone who, through life experience, has forged a healthy, happy, long-term relationship and can tell you what that looks and feels like and what compromises they do and don't make, right? If you go on Instagram or you go on TikTok and you just look for every dating influencer who has a meme, my God, it's you know, it's the Wild West, and that's the internet. It's the Wild West. So you could find anybody on the internet to validate your opinion. If you listen to me
Mm.
today and you're like, this guy doesn't know shit, he offended me, you could go on the internet, find someone who directly contradicts me, and you could follow that person, and that person's opinions are technically equally as valid. Um, we tend to like advice that validates what we already believe, like we like
Mm.
our news. And so I think the hard part is dialing into what is effective rather than what you want to believe. If someone says, Evan, you don't understand, I can't be happy unless he has a 150 IQ, right? And a Lamborghini, I know I'll feel like I'm settling. Okay, good luck. So I don't know what friends and family could do. They could love you, but my second book was called Why You're Still Single. I'm not suggesting anybody buy it. It's a long time ago. Why You're Still Single, things your friends would tell you if you promise not to get mad. And the publisher made me cut 2 chapters. One of the chapters, because they said women are not ready to hear this.
I can't wait.
And this is women telling me. This is very patronizing. The chapter was called Your Friends May Be Hazardous to Your Health. And how your friends could love you, but it doesn't mean they know what they're talking about or they have their best interests at heart. Maybe your best single girlfriend wants you to stay single instead of dating that really nice guy, because if she loses you, then she's going to be all alone. Maybe she was scarred by her experiences with her ex-boyfriend and sees everything through a lens of fear and scarcity and is imposing that on you. Right? Maybe. But turning to just the person to your left because they're there does not necessarily mean that person is capable of seeing clearly the thing that you're having trouble seeing clearly because you're too close to it. So I think finding people who know what they're talking about, a voice that you trust, is as valuable. And my clients have often learned to compartmentalize, right? They used to talk to their friends. Now they talk to other women and love you who all speak the same language, the kind of thing we're talking about today. They're all more informed than their friends. Because your friend who got married 30 years ago, what does she know about being single? Your friend who's given up on men, what does she know about your desire to find love and get married again? So you really need people who speak to where you are right now, not just people who sincerely love you.
Real quick, I just wanted to run a theory by you because a friend of mine actually wrote a book on this theory, and I find it intriguing, and I feel like I've seen it represented anecdotally, but I'd like to get your take. So the question is basically like, why is it so hard to find men who will commit? And one of the theory is basically that men are not going to want to commit, and within that, they're not going to want to find the woman they want to commit to. So they may like screw around for a while until they basically reach the apex of their careers. Because until then, women and commitment serve as a kind of threat. Like, I might have to stay in a single location for a family. I may have to put her career first, or it'll be competing. Or I could get a more high value woman once I'm rich and successful.
Sure.
What do you think of that?
I'll build on that. And I'll do it through the lens of my own experience. To me, it wasn't about being at the apex of my career. It was having a career. It was, and I would say the same thing about women. Like, women often turn to me when they're really at a low point, but the ones who are going to do the best in coaching are the ones who are like, my life is really good. The one thing I'm missing is a man, not women who are really, really struggling with employment or mental health or something like that. So you want to have a measure of stability before you can build onto that, because a new relationship can be potentially destabilizing unintentionally. So for me, I was very much looking for a wife in my late 20s, but I was a mess. I was a penniless screenwriter. So I had this big heart. I had a lot of love to give, right? But I was so miserable that it didn't matter what I wanted. I was ready once my career started going on an upward trajectory. It continued to go way past where I was when I met my wife. So that's my version of it, is he needs to have something that he feels secure in to be able to share in. He can't be in, like, if you're drowning, right, you don't try to save someone else's life. And sometimes people are in a place in their life where they're kind of drowning through no fault of their own. And it doesn't mean they're ever going to voluntarily take themselves out of the dating pool. It's your job to avoid the drowning guys. It's not your job to save them. Everyone's taken on a project. I could fix him. Right. So it's just finding guys who are at a good place and are ready. And timing is as important as anything else in a relationship.
I mean, that explains why my husband who was a filmmaker, like a working filmmaker in LA for many, many years, pivoted to law.
Mhm.
And then we got together. Just saying it's not an accident.
Well, but it is an interesting reversal of previous time when, I mean, in the 50s when people were getting married in their early 20s and kind of facing those challenges together. Now it feels like both partners have to be in a, they have to be actualized in some sense.
Well, it's why, I mean, there's a really good book on this if you're interested. It's called The All or Nothing Marriage by Eli Finkel. I had him on my podcast years ago. And it's not written by like a psychologist. He's a researcher. So he's really talking about the history of marriage and how it changed. Once upon a time, and we would have 9 kids, and 7 of them would till the fields, and then 4 of them would die. And right, like that was one form of marriage. And then eventually people started to marriage was a unit where we're going to build a better life for our children. We might hate each other, but we're going to stay together for the kids. And then it became about love, right? And we've actually gone past that, right, to self-actualization. Right? He calls it Mount Maslow, right? We've gone past getting our basic needs met, right? He's kind, he's committed, right? He's good to me, right? He needs to be a vegan. He needs to inspire me, right? Like it's the eat, pray, love. You don't need a man, you need a champion. So we've
Yeah.
gone so far up Mount Maslow that literally no one could qualify. He could have everything and you'll be like, I can do better.
Yeah.
And so, and by the way, that is one of the, right, the unexpected byproducts of second wave feminism, where women are independent, that you don't need a man. Right, in the 50s, you didn't have an education. If you're like my mom, you went at age 21 from your dad's house to your husband's house and you took care of the family. We don't want to go back to that. But by uncoupling that, right, those gender roles, now women have 1/3 more college degrees, right? 50-50 on becoming lawyers. We're in a place where women have decoupled needing to be protected and provided for.
Mm-hmm.
And it means you don't need men the way you used to. And that is a net good thing. But now you want a man, right? And we need to have a 21st century conversation about what you compromise on to do that. And my suggestion, which again doesn't go down easily for anybody, is that you start dating like a man, right? Be Rupert Murdoch. If you're a woman who's a millionaire, you could date your yoga instructor and it's fine. I've had clients who do that.
Mm-hmm.
Is he good to you? Does he make you happy? Does he make you feel safe, heard, and understood? Does he treat you well? Does he listen to you? Is he there for you? Does he give you quality time? Is he attractive to you? He doesn't have to have a fancier job or a fancier title than you do. No, you can't expect to have 2 CEOs. So women need to get around to what guys concluded a long time ago, is I can marry for love. I don't need to marry for protection or money. So by decoupling, he needs to make more than I do, you open up the whole world. Instead of dating like it's the 1950s, right? I have a master's degree, make 200 grand. He has to have a master's degree and make 200 grand. No, he doesn't. If you insist that he does, well, guess what? Your dating pool just went whoosh, because only 5% of people have master's degree is only 5% of people make 200 grand.
Yeah, I mean it's pairing well with the data showing that, yeah, I mean, as basically women date laterally and above, and as they become more and more and more educated, wealthy, successful, et cetera, then they have got like a sliver of men to date. Those men are huge playboys because they're wanted by all the women.
Right, but so let's break this down. This is a great place for us. If you're a woman who's in the 95th percentile, whatever that means to you, if you're in the 95th percentile, and just notice the definition. These are the women you can date. Well, that's a self-imposed thing, right? I can only date the 5% above me, right? Men don't have that.
Right.
Men don't need taller, richer, smarter, funnier. So I can only date the 5% above me is what you tell yourself. So that starts with 5% of the dating pool. Now, we've already discussed half of that dating pool doesn't want to date themselves. They want to date the first grade teacher.
Right.
Okay, so we've just cut our dating pool in half. Now it's 2.5% of men. What have we discovered about other smart, strong, successful, busy, egotistical, opinionated men?
They're bad to date or marry.
Or maybe there's just a little bit too much masculine energy and ego and opinion.
Yeah.
And it's not a good compatible fit when you find the male version of you who's also as busy traveling and building his career and his brand.
Yeah.
Right. And so we've reduced our dating pool to a sliver of the population. And that's before we've talked about anything: character, kindness, consistency, communication, commitment. And then we say, why is it so hard to find a guy to date? And that's the rules you made up for yourself. They don't have to be the rules. Those are the rules we've created. So I'm challenging that idea and letting everybody know that if you date guys who are basically in the top 10, 15%, right? Even if he's 5'9" and makes $90,000, you're going to be fine. And you'll be happy because he's going to be good to you. And that's the thing you can't get anywhere else.
Amazing. Well, at this point, we usually like to wrap up by suggesting resources. So, can you tell us about your books, your course, and then any maybe books you'd recommend?
Oh gosh. Well, my name's Evan Mark Katz. I'm a dating coach for high achieving women who have everything but the guy. I'm hopefully Googleable. I've got a podcast called the Love You Podcast. My signature course is called Love You. Instagram, Real Evan Mark Katz, et cetera, et cetera. I have a bibliography. You said books. You go to evanmarkkatz.com/writing, and there's dozens of books that I think are really interesting about this subject, if you're interested in this subject as well. And for your listeners, I created a special gift. If you go to evanmarkkatz.com/little help, you could download the 7 massive mistakes you're making in dating, which I think are kind of eye-openers because they don't always sound like mistakes until you think about how you can accidentally get in your own way. So you can get on my mailing list and I'll send you some free advice. And if you're really serious about love, you can go to evanmarkkatz.com/apply and fill out an application for Love You. But that's all the self-promotion I could do in 30 seconds.
Amazing.
So happy you decided to come on. We may see you back another time because I could talk about dating forever. I'm glad that I'm done with it, or at least hope that I'm done with it.
I hope so
But
too.
yeah, postmortems are of my entire 20s.
That's what your 20s are for. I mean,
Yeah,
that's the hard part is no one wants to have those experiences, but those mistakes help guide you in the right direction if we can all learn from our mistakes instead of repeating our mistakes. So that's really the challenge. There's no way to get online, choose a guy and ride off into the sunset with him. We have to be able to learn from our mistakes and persevere.
absolutely. All right, everyone. Well, if you loved Evan as much as we did, please give us a 5-star rating on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And we'll see you all next time. By accessing this podcast, I acknowledge that the hosts of this podcast make no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast and any and all content or services available on or through this podcast are provided for general, non-commercial informational purposes only and do not constitute the practice of medical or any other professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and should not be considered or used as a substitute for the independent professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment of a duly licensed and qualified healthcare provider. In case of a medical emergency, you should immediately call 911. The hosts do not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement.